Hey everybody, Dr. Dan Lawrence here, Associate Professor of Writing at the University of Wisconsin Superior, Department of Writing, Language, and Literature. So what I want to do in this video, this is for advanced rhetoric. We have rhetoric through everyday things here, and I want to be looking at, what I'm going to be doing is looking at this first essay in the book by Dr. Marilyn Cooper, Listening to Strange Strangers, Modifying Dreams. And I just want to read a couple passages with you and kind of create a model of what I'm thinking about when I'm reading this, do a kind of active reading with you if it's helpful. If you're struggling with some of the kind of academic language or making sense of what Dr. Cooper's talking about, and as a way of kind of easing you into the style of this book and some of the concepts that our authors are talking about through these various essays. And also to show you, right, to model how I think about when I'm reading something as a rhetorical scholar, as a writer, as a thinker, just some of the associations that I make and some of the things that I think about, and then how to draw inspiration from a text for a paper or for something that you're going to write about. As you're reading this book, throughout the coming weeks, you're going to want to be looking for connections, for syntheses, for places of inspiration, for things for you to write about, for your paper for this class. We're going to really work on developing that singular research paper into a publishable piece of writing. Or, as I've said elsewhere, if it helps you to kind of conceptualize it like, it's the first chapter of a nonfiction book or something like that. If that's more interesting to you than writing a long research paper, same scope, same page length, but you can just kind of think about it in that way if that helps you get more interested in the work as a writer. Okay, so we have Listening to Strange Strangers, Modifying Dreams. It starts on page 17 of Rhetoric Through Everyday Things, edited by Scott Barnett and Casey Boyle. And we have a little epigraph at the beginning from Bill Green. Matter sings in its spinning and tumbling, its locked vibrations, its transitory leaps it sings, but we cannot hear. Behind the most placid surface there is a ceaseless, sibilant whispering, a kind of delicate rustling and turning, unattended sounds so profligate and spendthrift, so seductive, that if they did not lie forever beyond us, we would be held totally in their thrall. Already I make so connections. I'm thinking about matter sings. Isn't there kind of a inherent vibration to the universe? And not to go too woo-woo, but in the physics of it, right? That the quantum level, there's things we don't quite understand, subatomic particles flitting in and out of existence. Um, Matter is always moving. It seems stationary. I'm touching this wooden table here right in front of me. It seems stationary, but we're flying through the universe. We're spinning in a galaxy. There's vibration. Everything is moving and spinning and tumbling. Locked vibrations, transitory leaps. Matter sings. I'm thinking about Phaedrus. I'm thinking about Plato's cicadas, if you remember that from Writing 303, the ceaseless singing of the universe. So there we're thinking about rhetoric and music and communication. And it's just like every sentence is a portal into something else, an inspiration, branching. As a scholar, I'm always thinking about syntheses and connections and branches and where do we go from this. So for this epigraph from Bill Green, I go back to Plato or the other ancient Greek thinkers who, some of the early astronomical models they thought about um, the harmony. They didn't quite work out all the astronomy of our solar system, but they seemed to think that there was some kind of cosmic melody that held everything together. So from that ancient poetic astronomical um, concept, we're brought here to this, something that's actually grounded in physics. Okay, I better keep going because this will be a long video if I don't read a little more. So then Dr. Cooper comes in and says Timothy Morton argues that ecological thought is the thinking of interconnectedness, the imagining of a multitude of entangled, strange strangers. And he asks, what would a truly democratic encounter between truly equal beings look like? What could it look like? Could we even imagine it? Notice Cooper's style. She starts with an interesting quotation. She borrows that phrase, strange strangers, and uses it for her title. Inspiration, creativity. We're borrowing from other places. We're adapting, we're reconfiguring, and we're bringing it into our own language. So just notice Cooper's style there. She starts with this really interesting quotation from Morton, and then she moves on to Garston. Some of you read Brian Garston's work, Saving Persuasion, in another one of my classes, but even if you haven't, Cooper writes, Brian Garston's vision of persuasion is a practice of controversy in smaller disputes, piecemeal, as they arise in particular situations and in smaller settings. Garston argues that the project of persuasion requires that we once again look directly at one another and speak directly to one another, that we pay attention to our fellow citizens and to their opinions. Isn't that interesting? Because I believe there's quite a bit of contemporary psychological research about attentiveness and selective attention and how we focus our attention, even in like popular nonfiction self-help books. I know like there's this vein of thought about mindfulness and meditation, where we place our attention. And so Garston, what Cooper is doing is she sets up Morton. Morton proposes, what if you could democratically truly be on equal footing with another human and just speak? There's no power relation, there's no money, there's no class, you're really just talking one-on-one with another person. But then Cooper says, that's a wild idea. It's too idealistic. It's never going to happen. So I go to Garston then, she says. Dr. Cooper says, then I go to Garston. And Garston's concept of rhetoric is all these tiny conversations piecemeal happening. And that's what composes a democracy, is all of these little interactions that are happening all the time in the world, between me and a book, between me and you, between you and your friends and your colleagues, between you and your supervisor, between them and their families. And everywhere is this interconnectedness, these deep kind of real connections that constitute a democracy, that constitute social collaboration, that constitute the world that we live in. It's lovely. It's a really interesting idea. Then where does Cooper go? Persuasion happens when we pay attention. So we have all these ideas about democracy and attention and rhetoric. The questions I take up here, so now Cooper has gone from Morton to Garston and then says, here's what I think. The questions I take up here are, how do we listen? And how do we be persuaded by, or as Garston has it, persuade ourselves in response to encounters with these others? And what changes in our understanding of persuasion does listening to strange strangers entail? Answers to these questions involve rethinking the concepts of listening and persuasion. And as my answer to the first question relies on answering the second, I will start. So there she's giving you this organizational framework. This is kind of like Cooper's thesis statement, right? She's saying, what is the topic of this essay going to be? And then gives you a little bit of an organizational schema that she's going to follow. First answering the first question and then the second. I will start by exploring how persuasion can be conceived of more inclusively to apply to strange strangers, such as dragonflies. That's a wild idea, right? You have a rhetorical scholar, an intellectual saying, I'm going to tell you about my encounter with a dragonfly and what that meant to me and how I communicated with it. And I'm going to use that as an example. I'm going to use that anecdote as an example of how I'm going to push the boundaries of your understanding of persuasion and listening. Cool setup, right? That's like your whole exposition. That's basically all of, this page one here. Then she goes on, then I will explore what habits of listening might enable us to hear and respond to such things as cochlear implants, hummingbirds, and elemental cobalt. So those are the evidence that she's going to provide, right? Sometimes you hear that in like an introductory composition course. Your thesis statement lays out what the argument will be and then roughly goes over the organization or what are the primary points of evidence that you're going to use to support that. Not that we have to mimic Cooper's style here. I'm just bringing this up because it's interesting and might help you interpret the piece. So there you have it. Now let's go on then. So then Cooper dives right into this dragonfly thing. She wants to challenge our perception of what persuasion means by telling us about dragonflies and her encounter with a dragonfly. I really love this. I think it's creative. I think it's interesting. My first example is of a particular encounter in a small setting between what I would call incommensurable beings. I was driving down a gravel road. Here we have some narrative that's interesting as a reader that engages us. We have that first person narration, personal anecdote. I was driving down a gravel road when something buzzed in through the open passenger side window and landed on my thigh. Glancing down, I saw a bright blue spangled dragonfly. I suspect this might have occurred in Houghton, somewhere up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, around Michigan Tech. Glancing down, I saw a bright blue spangled dragonfly about 3 inches long with crawly-looking legs. Fortunately, before I panicked, it buzzed out the open window and on my side of the car. I was startled, and the encounter left a lasting impression. It drew me out of myself. There she brings Garston back in here. It drew me out of myself, just as Garston says is required by the effort of persuasion. I was still thinking about it hours later. There's a cool point of inspiration. It's like, when you're looking for a subject of analysis for your papers or you're thinking about what you might want to write about, like what has been your dragonfly lately? Not to be too excessively poetic, but what has startled you out of yourself? What has drawn you out of yourself in that Garston terminology lately? Have you encountered something that really surprised you or challenged you or made you think? Could that be a possible subject for analysis? Could that be a possible subject for you to write about? It certainly was for Dr. Cooper here. A dragonfly flew into her truck when she was driving down a gravel road, and then she stopped and she thought about it. She was still thinking about it hours later. She was so captivated by this strange encounter, that strange stranger, that other creature, that other life form. Dragonflies are not entirely strange to me. I believe they won't harm me, and many are beautiful, including this one. This slight bit of familiarity accounts in part for the particular impression the dragonfly made, but the effort of paying attention has less to do with familiarity than with divergence. Now look at we have more allusions here. That's the rhetorical terminology. Drawing on other authors, drawing on other thinkers. Isabel Stenger's Thinking with Alfred North Whitehead. So dropping two scholars in there in the same sentence. Because that's what Stenger's has done. So Cooper is channeling Stenger's, who was channeling Alfred North Whitehead, who you might know from other classes. Whitehead is that book, Modes of Thought. So observes that divergence is a more productive focus for thinking about encounters with all kinds of others. She contrasts argumentation, interaction, and rational conversation with Whitehead's brand of speculative thought. She's building up some more theoretical background here to explain this encounter with the dragonfly. Habits of experience do not simply arise. Back to Garson on 19, and so on and so on. Bruno Latour on 21. You can see how Cooper kind of dances from thinker to thinker. And so that is that's something that works well in nonfiction style, in academic style, when you're thinking about, how, if you were to write a book, what are those bridges going to be? What are those transitions going to be? How are you going to get from point A to point Z, right? You're going to need some stops in between there. And so this is pretty typical of academic writing in the humanities. It's also typical of popular nonfiction writing, is you have some waypoints. You're drawing on, stories, anecdotes, other thinkers, famous texts, well-known works, quotations from other thinkers, particular points of analyses, little interesting bits of information, and then through you move through your writing just like that. I'm going to wrap up this video now. I hear some shuffling in the background, but the focus of this was to just kind of model how you can read an academic essay in a way that's inspiring, in a way that's associative, in a way that's creative, in a way that's going to help you write your own papers, just as a way of demonstrating that, we don't have to agree with every argument that Cooper makes, but it might just be a point of inspiration for you as you're moving along the journey. And I don't want you to get disheartened, disillusioned, or bogged down by the academic style. I think if you go slow, you can decode that kind of heavy style, because there's a play to it too. There's a funness to it, and I hope you see that. That's why I love this Cooper piece especially, but many other essays in this book. It's like, an intellectual encounter with a dragonfly, and that's fun. That's as much poetry as it is academia. So good luck, everybody. Let me know if you need any help with anything, and this is just to serve as a little bit of a model for how I think that you can have a fun time reading these texts.